Welcome into another episode of Everything is Logistics, a podcast for the thinkers in freight. I am your host, Blythe Milligan, and we are proudly presented by SPI Logistics. And in this episode, I want to talk about how you can use AI to sort through tariff drama. Now, these two topics, tariffs and AI, it feels like the news cycle for these two industries or tools or policies, whatever you want to call it. It feels like this news cycle changes on the hour, every hour. It's really challenging from a personal perspective in order to keep up with it all. But for this episode, I wanted to talk about the real world examples of how I use these different AI tools in order to help prep for a talk on tariffs in about a week's time. Now, I have worked in logistics in some capacity over the last 15 years. But even this topic of tariffs and global supply chain, geopolitical tensions, the historical contexts around all of them, it is a very intimidating subject to learn about or try to dive into. And with the news cycle changing so much on it, I said to myself, I got to get a hold of this thing. I got to get my arms around it. And what is the best way to do that? And so in this episode, I'm going to be breaking down the process that I used to prepare for that talk on tariffs and how it's affecting the global supply chain, which I gave that talk earlier today. So while everything is still fresh in my mind, I want to be able to break down the process in which I helped disseminate some of the information sources and even more sources that I even had in order to get a full picture on what's going on. And why this should interest you is because if you work in freight, you work in logistics, it's your job to understand these things too. And even to a higher extent, being able to take this insight and take this knowledge and be able to share it with your customers and with your leads and really with your colleagues as well. So then that way you can prove that you are a subject matter expert on this particular topic. I'm going to borrow a comparison or I guess an insight tip. A friend of the show, Grace Sharkey, she was on LinkedIn recently and was talking about, the impacts of, AI. I don't want to say bots, but companies that have implemented different calling systems, calling structures, especially around like AI bots that can handle like sales calls for you, customer support, tracking, load updates, things like that. Those bots are increasingly handling that part of your job. Theoretically, it should open your role up more so that you can focus on the things that are going to be more impactful, that are going to be more, especially impactful for your customers. So the example that she used was if I'm a freight broker and I'm moving lumber, I want to know how tariffs and how global trade policy is going to impact the commodity that I care about the most. And if my brokerage partner, if my freight broker, if my freight forwarder is not keeping up with the commodity that I as a customer care about the most, then why do I even have you as a partner? I want to go find somebody else that is, you have access to all of the same AI driven tools, but you're not using that time to keep my business focus in at the front burner instead of in the back burner. So positioning yourself as a freight broker or as a freight forwarder or just an executive that's working in logistics, showing that you can keep on top of the latest news so that your customers aren't asking for this information. You can be more proactive about that process. And so that's what this show is going to cover, is the process behind information collection, information dissection, and then reporting that information to your audience to position yourself as a subject matter expert in that particular realm so you can win more business and keep the business that you have, especially in a challenging or tight market, which is what we have found ourselves in over the last year and a half or so, and probably going to be in for the foreseeable future. Another thread that I kind of want to pull on for this discussion is recently the CEO, Toby, I'm blanking on his last name, but the CEO of Shopify, Toby, had recently put out a company announcement and then made it public that his company is AI first. All of the employees within the company, you are not allowed to hire someone new or ask for more resources until you prove that you cannot get what you need to get done without AI. And so I think that is a really pivotal shift for a major company to take and publicly take it. And so Shopify is not going to be the first or not going to be the last company to make an announcement like this. They might be the first one to publicly announce it, but they're not going to be the last one to have this initiative in place because lots of things are getting disrupted, especially in the age of AI and especially in the world of global trade and tariffs. And so I thought that was a good example to start thinking about what your processes look like, defining them. Many organizations don't even define what their processes look like, but also being prepared to rip those processes out and start fresh with some of these more, coming to I guess the center stage of some of these AI tools such as Grok, Notebook LLM, or not LLM, Notebook LM. And then of course you have your ChatGPTs and Anthropic and all of the rest. So we have a perfect use case to start with this. And I want to talk about the process. So the system, first things first is you have to think about the system in which you collect information. And I'm talking about when you're scrolling LinkedIn, when you're scrolling Twitter/X, when you get an email, all of these different data sources of where you're scrolling, you need to have a central place where you can store different nuggets of information, and how you store that information matters a lot. You don't want to have 17 different places where you have bookmarks, because if you have that information all spread out, then you're not going to be able to compile it into a centralized place so you can actually learn from it and take action on that data or on that insight. And so the first step in your process, you have to develop one thing that's going to work for you. Now, this is a process that I have changed and ripped out and started fresh and started new several different times over. But my main strategy of what I use is I'm scrolling on X/Twitter a lot. I am a paying member, so I have access to bookmarks. I don't know if bookmarks is a paid feature or not. But that's the system where I get the overwhelming majority of my news is on X. And so I have a system inside of my bookmarks where I have different topics that I regularly cover: marketing, AI, source to porch, all of these different story ideas. I have folders for each of them. And anytime I find something interesting, I save it to that particular bookmarked folder. Now, another method that I use is in my email, because the majority of the things that or I guess I should say the way that I scroll the internet, the easiest way for me to store those ideas outside of Twitter/X is that I email it to myself. So I have emails that I will email to myself, and I'll just continuously reply to that same email, especially if it's a centralized theme. Tariffs is a perfect example. I was giving a talk on tariffs. Originally, the talk was supposed to be supply chain trends for 2025, and that quickly changed to tariffs and how it impacts supply chains. And so, as somebody who I've worked in this industry for, like I said, 15 plus years, and so, but that's still a level of education that I am not 1,000% sure on my educational level or knowledge, expertise, insight, whatever you want to call it. There's always something to learn. And so, with that particular, I guess, sector of logistics, I found myself really weak on knowledge base wise. And so being able to have a system where I email myself specifically, this is what we're going to be talking about: supply chain. It was tariffs and global supply chain trends. So that was an email that I emailed to myself. The show breakdown, I was lucky enough to get, a couple of overview questions of what we were going to cover in the talk. And so I had that as sort of the basis of the first email that I sent to myself. Then over the course of the last, say, 10 days or so, with all of this tariff drama coming out, it was an email that I just consistently, if I found something on Reddit, if I found something on LinkedIn, if it was an email, I click on the view in browser and I save all of those URLs. I save them all either to Twitter/X, or I email them to myself, so that way I'm developing my own sort of data repository where I can go back to and that will be important for the next step. And so having all of that information saved up, it really was key to take the next step. And that is collecting all of the information is one aspect, but then putting all of that information into a centralized place to compile a research report is that next step. And then that's where a lot of these different AI tools come into place. So I guess maybe it would be helpful to share my screen in this regard. So let me go ahead and share my screen. And for those who are listening, I'll describe it what you see on the screen. So let me bring up this first analysis that I found, which it comes from Semi-Analysis, the website and brand. I've only recently discovered them, but they put out some really good in-depth insight. I mean, just look at the table of contents here on the left-hand side of the screen. I mean, dozens of topics that you can quickly jump around to. I mean, it's talking like key exclusions in Trump's executive order, board level and rack assembly for NVIDIA and its partners, the UPS system, switchgear, diesel generators, transformers, air cooled chillers, all of these different things that are talking about the ultimate art, or not the ultimate, but the title of the article, and that's Tariff Armageddon, GPU loopholes, Mexico supply chain shift, all of these different reports into this research report by Semi-Analysis. This is such a great resource, especially when they do global insights for specifically around trade. You can see how long this article is. And so this is free on their site. I'll link it in the show notes, but it's semianalysis.com, and it talks about tariff Armageddon. But that's one of the sources that I use. Like, so for example, this is a lot of information already. And so what I've done is I've saved that URL and compiled it into a list, into either my bookmarks on X, or I emailed it to myself. In this case, I emailed this article to myself. So that way I can read through it when I get a chance, or taking the next step. Let me show you another information resource really quick before we talk about the next step. And that's data that comes from Vision. Now, for people who don't know who Vision is, it's Vizion. They create a lot of really great analysis. They're a visibility software platform, but they create a lot of really good analysis too. And so if you're looking on the screen right now, they have a lot of resources that you can check out on their website. I will link to that again. But, just different graphs talking about how a lot of shippers or a lot of customers in the first quarter of this year, they front loaded a lot of their shipments, meaning that they ordered them well in advance ahead of the tariff announcements that took place on April 2nd. And so what they did is they ordered a heck of a lot of goods, a lot more than what they used to. I think some of Vision's data said it was a 70% increase year over year for the amount of bookings in the month of January. And January already sees an increased amount of bookings, especially for Southeast Asia countries, because China has their Chinese New Year, and that happens typically around the end of January. And so there's a lot of front loading of ordering that goes on during that time frame anyways. But in anticipation of Trump's tariffs and the tariff policy, and just sort of the we don't know what the hell is going to happen mindset, that is where tools like Vision can really come into play, and they can show you what kind of moves are being made, and they're sharing that data on their site as well. So this is another one of the sites that I bookmarked and saved. And so after you have that system of saving all of your informational resources, then it comes time to the next step. And so I've been leading to it for a minute now. So let me share with you inside of Grok, which is located on X's platform slash Twitter. I'm gonna get tired of saying slash Twitter every 5 seconds. So I'm just gonna say X from here on out. Muscle memory. I have to start developing that muscle memory to say X instead of Twitter. I think I've held out a little too long on just the phrase of like keep calling it Twitter. Twitter is such a better name than X anyways, but that's another story. Okay, so you can see on the screen right now that I'm inside of Grok, and these were the topic questions. So sort of the overview of the discussion that I participated in today. And I wanted to make sure that I used all of my resources and all of my research that I had been gathering in order to center that data and that research around these key questions and these key insights. And so using Grok, I was able to prompt it to say, help me prepare for this podcast interview while covering the supply chain trends that are currently being impacted, better or worse, by the latest tariff drama, along with reasons why all of the world's manufacturing is located mostly in China. Who stands to benefit from that manufacturing dominance leading the country? And then I said, please also include insight and quotes learned from these tweets and its media. And so these were all of the bookmarked tweets that I had And these are not just bookmark tweets, but also YouTube videos, which has been hugely helpful in preparing for this discussion and just preparing for my overall sort of mindset. So there is about 30 links here that I had saved that I wanted Grok's deep research tool, which now they have a deeper research tool. Instead of just deep research, it's deeper research. And I instructed it to look at all of these different links and then compile different stats and quotes, interesting takeaways centered around those four general overview questions of the talk that I was going to be participating in. And look what it went through. It went through 119 different sources during the deeper research. Not only the sources that I added, but also additional sources, about 90 additional sources that it added, and it created this entire research report. I'm talking hundreds, probably thousands of words here that can give me an overall view, but then also a breakdown, which is, I think, really helpful, especially for someone, in the role that I am, where I'm talking on a screen just like this, but I have notes off to the side that I like to reference. And so being able to compile, I mean, I can't exactly like look at paragraphs and paragraphs of text and make it an engaging show or make it an interest. That would be super boring and just not really, not exciting to listen to. I don't know that I would want to see that. I want people to cut to the chase in their podcast interviews or the podcast conversations. And so this was a way to help make a cheat sheet for myself, to have those topic overviews of what we were going to be talking about in the conversation, and then all of the research that was given. Now, I took that same prompt and I added it into ChatGPT. ChatGPT also has a deep research tool, but I happen to find that in my specific sort of anecdotal experience, that Grok is much better at doing the deep research reports, but ChatGPT is much better at putting it into a much more reader friendly document. And so you can kind of see the difference in. So, same prompt if you're watching on the screen right now. So, same exact prompt, all of the same links. ChatGPT did go through and like ask me a couple follow-up questions just to I don't know why. Grok didn't ask me that, but went back through and I answered those for it to use key takeaways and quotes from the tweets and YouTube videos to help answer the podcast interview questions and topics. I also asked for a detailed briefing to help me explain the nuance, the history, how supply chains functioned before, and where they are moving to now, and the new global trade agenda. And I wanted both global impact and US versus China outcomes. And so it took about 10 minutes to put together this deep research report. And so it made this entire report. Now, the only thing I kind of could gripe about is that it used some of the links that I sent it, but it didn't use all of them. It used, let's see, one, two, three. It used about four of the links that I sent it. And that's a little frustrating on my end because if I'm going through the process of reading through all of the news on a daily basis and saving the things that I think that are the most important, that's what I want you to sort through first from an AI tool perspective. ChatGPT didn't necessarily do that. They have a lot of sources from Reuters. Yeah, I think that's how you pronounce it, is Reuters, and a lot of other sites like what is this? Cryptopolian.com. Yeah, some of these links, I wouldn't pick them as a source. So how ChatGPT picked those as a source, I don't know. But it put together this entire research report. And so you can kind of see, if you're watching on the screen, this is thousands of words. And based on, and at first, the first response that I gave was based on all this research, create a set of 5 to 7 bullet points with stats and quotes for each of these questions. So I kind of had to prompt it again in a different way. And like, okay, look, you went through all of the work of getting all of and compiling all of that information, but it still didn't help me get to my goal of making it digestible, making it into a digestible format. So I asked it again, had to prompt it again. And it gave me a table. I don't really want a table. I just want bullet points. I just want something simple. So that's a little bit of an aggravation from ChatGPT, which is why I now prefer the process of let's just collect all of our sources, load it into Grok. Grok will actually go through each of the links that I give it and come up with the research report, but then taking that research report and loading it into a chat GPT because it allows me the position to have all of this research, have some of the suggested questions and answers that I was already thinking through, but then be able to prompt a chat GPT and say, what am I missing? Poke holes in my arguments. And that has been the bigger unlock, is being able to load in the work that you've already done and asking it to poke holes in it, asking it, what am I missing? Things like that. So then that way it can give you a much better response. And so if you're looking at the screen, you can kind of see that now it's starting to give me a little bit more of a better response where I can have the context around the question and then have the information that's going to be the most helpful to the audience, especially because we're working in, limited time frames. I think, the conversation that we recorded was around 40 minutes, and you frankly it could take hours, sometimes days, to explain complex geopolitical issues, tariff conversations. Trying to compile all of that into a nuanced discussion is incredibly challenging. And so this was really helpful to help me sort through all of the ideas that I thought were interesting and then to poke holes in those ideas so I can get a bigger picture of what is going on in the world, and then thus help other people have a bigger picture of what's going on in the world as well. And so if you thought we were done, we are not done. So if you're looking at the screen, I did ask it, a few other questions outside of the research that I had told it to check. I said, what are some of the more interesting stats? It did give me a stat on US tariffs on China hit 104% in April 2025. By the time it was giving me that number, the tariff news, the US had already increased it to 145%. And so that's where I think that Grok is much more accurate in the latest news realm, because who knows where they are pulling that information, because or ChatGPT is pulling that information, because inside of Grok, it had the 145%, which is correct. It had that correct amount of US tariffs on China, at the correct amount, while ChatGPT did not. So, out of all of this information, I copied and pasted what I thought was the most interesting part. And my favorite thing about these LLMs is that they just have this fancy, copy and paste tool. So I can literally just hit that little copy button. And then I brought it over to a Google Doc and I pasted the top takeaways from Grok, the top takeaways from ChatGPT, pasted it all in one doc so I could have this cheat sheet. Now I have much more information on here, and it's literally 13 pages of notes inside of my Google Docs, but I wanted to have the one pager. That is key for doing, interviews and talks and things like that. Is just having a one pager that you can quickly glance at and then come right back to the screen and right back and making eye contact camera wise. So I have my little cheat sheet, but I took it one step further, and I think this is going to be the more interesting unlock for a lot of you. Is that if you take wait I didn't even change my screen. So sorry. Here is the Google Doc in case you're watching on screen, or if you're just listening, you didn't notice anything. It was the same information. But if you're looking on the screen, there's my one pager doc of all of those pages of information condensed into one block. Now, obviously, it's not going to be fully in depth. It's not meant to be. It's meant to be that I can find a keyword and then be able to riff on that particular topic, because I've already done the legwork of the research, of listening to podcast interviews and YouTube videos and digesting it that way over the course of the last week, but then just using it as a compilation, as a data collection method, in order to turn all of that information, stats, quotes, things like that, into a one pager that is really, really easy to look at. Now, next step is to go over to NotebookLM, which is from Google. And they have a plus option. So if you're looking at the screen, they have a plus option, but they also have a free version. I've been using the free version. I might upgrade to the plus version. But basically, you are able to take a massive amount of contextual data. So all of that text that you just saw me scrolling through on the screen, thousands of words, you can take that information and use it as a data source inside of NotebookLM. And what it will do then is it will create a podcast overview of everything that you compiled into that data source. So if you're looking on the screen right now, let me share this NotebookLM tab of what I've already created and what I actually used for to prep for this interview. And so you can see on the left-hand side, they have what you can add as a source. You can add up to 50 sources of information. I just chose to paste a bunch of information into the doc. I might try, links in the future because you can also add that as well. You can kind of see on the screen right now where you can add Google Drive links, just a regular link, YouTube links, and then you can also paste in text. That's what I did is I pasted in text from all of the research from Grok and from ChatGPT, pasted those sources in so you can see them on the left-hand side over here. And then on the right-hand side, it will typically say, generate an audio overview. The audio overview, and I might have to do a separate episode on this because it is if you haven't played around with this, it is incredible because it takes this massive amount of information and it turns it into a podcast hosted by a male and a female, and they have a damn near perfect podcast cadence. I want to play for you the first, I don't want to say like 30 seconds to a minute of this podcast because it sounds like a normal podcast, but it's a podcast made out of all of the insight that I gathered up over the course of the week, research documents, things like that. It makes the podcast. So it made a 24-minute podcast based on all of that information that I loaded into the system. And take a listen into the first 30 seconds because it sounds so normal.
That feeling when your news feed is just, wall to wall updates about global trade, tariffs flying left and right. You can honestly feel like you're drowning in information sometimes,
Yeah,
right?
it's overwhelming.
Well, think of this as your lifeline. This deep dive, it's designed to give you a clear, concise handle on the really crucial shift happening in global commerce right now.
Exactly. We've basically waded through a mountain of stuff for you. The latest news, obviously, but also expert takes on social media and some really deep industry reports.
Mm-hmm.
The goal here is just to cut through all that noise and bring you the key things you need to know to understand what's really going on.
And today, we're zoning in on something pretty significant, that major escalation in the US-China trade conflict back in April 2025.
Right, and the huge impact it had on global supply chains.
Yeah.
Now, if you heard all of that, that is incredible. It sounds like a normal podcast. This was completely generated by AI using the information that I've already gathered. And so if you want to hear that full discussion, because it is a great discussion, I happen to prefer listening to podcasts because it's so unintrusive to what I'm already doing during the day. And so I can cook dinner, I can fold laundry, I can clean the bathroom, I can do all of these things and still listen to a podcast. And so think about it from that lens. Like even YouTube, I love YouTube, watch it every single day. But you have most YouTube videos, you have to be watching the screen. So you can't really do other things while you're watching YouTube. This changes that. Podcast changes that, and it has changed that for more than a decade. I think 20 years. Gosh, however long podcasting has been around. But I think 20 years. Yeah, that's neither here nor there. But this is a totally new way to interact with information, collect information, compile it together, and then listen to a podcast recording that is done on demand. And it made that episode in less than 5 minutes based on all of that data. And then I'm able to go through, I can get ready, I can do my makeup in the morning, I can get ready for, you know, YouTube internet things and being on camera while I'm listening to the research that I've already compiled. So this is a major, major unlock. And if you want to hear the rest of that podcast conversation, you're able to download the file and either share it with your team, but I'm going to share it with all of y'all on this particular episode. So then that way you can hear about all of the research that I did and then listen to this feedback of this podcast episode. And maybe you can use this in your own research efforts and your own team building efforts, because it really is so incredible. So that was I guess my final result of all of the news that I compiled, the way I was able to prep for that conversation. And I think that this centers around, what I hinted on earlier in this episode is that in this world where AI is slowly taking over specific job roles and job duties, it's not the person that's going to be replaced by AI. It's the person using AI that is going to replace other jobs and other workers. And so if you're not using these tools, you need to start baking it into your workday. Just keep a tab open on your computer screen. Keep ChatGPT open on your computer screen. Start asking it questions that you would typically ask Google. You would be surprised at how good the answers are. Now, I do believe that there are different use cases per AI platform, but overall, I thought that you guys would find this interesting because you're able to use these tools, especially around a topic like tariffs, to gain a greater understanding, a greater education on that topic. So then that way you can go back to your customers and go back to your leads and tell them how much you care about their freight, how much you care about their business, and that you're thinking about it as well. That is the goal of using AI tools. So then that way you can get rid of less of the grunt work. This would have taken me, I don't even want to, weeks to be able to compile and find good pull quotes and put it into an interesting format, and then be able to shift on a dime on what we're talking about conversation wise. Now I can do that much faster because I'm able to have a system in place where I can save that information and then not only compile that information into a research report, but take action on that research and be able to share it and set myself up and my company up as a subject matter expert in this arena. So it the world is shifting fast. AI and tariffs, there's a lot of drama around each of those. Neither of these two things are going away. So how can you use these modern day tools to gain a competitive advantage? I think that this is a pretty good process to follow and experiment with. I'd be curious to hear if any of you have experimented with a similar route in data collection and research and how it is helping you in your day to day. Would love to hear some of your use cases. So if you have any of those, please let me know. But that about does it for this episode. I thought that this would, well, not quite, because we are going to add in that downloaded audio file. So if you want to hear about the new tariff world order supply chain upheaval, which is the podcast episode created by Google's NotebookLM based on the research data that I fed it, we are going to play that immediately after. But if you don't tune in, thanks for listening. I appreciate your attention, and I would highly suggest to tune in because this could be a fantastic new way of collecting data, compiling it, and then acting on that data. So hope y'all enjoy.
That feeling when your news feed is just, wall-to-wall updates about global trade, tariffs flying left and right. You can honestly feel like you're drowning in information sometimes. Right?
Yeah, it's overwhelming.
Well, think of this as your lifeline. This deep dive, it's designed to give you a clear, concise handle on the really crucial shift happening in global commerce right now.
Exactly. We've basically waded through a mountain of stuff for you. The latest news, obviously, but also expert takes on social media and some really deep industry reports.
Mm-hmm.
The goal here is just to cut through all that noise and bring you the key things you need to know to understand what's really going on.
And today, we're zoning in on something pretty significant. That major escalation in the U.S.-China trade conflict back in April 2025.
Right, and the huge impact it had on global supply chains.
Yeah.
Just massive ripples.
So our mission here really is to give you the context. Why these new tariffs? Why was so much manufacturing concentrated in China to begin with?
And the real-time upheaval. How companies are scrambling to react, who's winning, who's losing in all this.
Yeah, and how it hits different industries differently, plus what companies are actually doing to become more resilient.
And technology's role. It's playing a surprisingly big part in this whole transformation.
Okay, let's dive in. Let's unpack this. So April 2nd, 2025, the U.S. announces some pretty hefty new import tariffs.
Yeah, significant changes. We're talking 10% up to, 49% on various goods.
And the stated reason, according to the reports, was about bringing manufacturing back home, making America wealthy again, that sort of thing.
That was the line. And look, these weren't just minor tweaks. This move pushed overall U.S. tariff rates to their highest point in a century.
100 years. That's quite a statement, a real shift in trade policy.
Absolutely. And China, Well, they didn't wait long to react, did they?
No, pretty much immediately they hit back with their own reciprocal tariffs on U.S. exports.
Which just set the stage for things to escalate fast.
And they did. A few days later, the U.S. doubled down. An additional 104% tariff on Chinese goods.
Right. And the justification given was China's refusal to drop its initial 34% duties.
So let's just add that up. There was already a 20% tariff from earlier, February 25. Add the new 104%. That puts the total tariff on many Chinese goods at a massive 145%.
An enormous cost increase for importers. Just huge.
And the markets, they definitely noticed.
Oh, yeah. The S&P 500 plunged, about 10% in just 2 days?
Wow.
And it wasn't just the U.S. The whole global stock market kind of went into a tailspin.
Yeah.
I saw a quote from investor James Lai saying, basically, whatever you think about tariffs, the timing was just terrible, really disruptive.
Yeah, that makes sense. And this wasn't just about tariffs on finished goods, was it? The conflict took another turn.
It did. China started using its leverage over critical materials, things essential for high-tech manufacturing.
We saw reports they were targeting key parts of the U.S. supply chain for these materials.
Exactly. They had already put restrictions on exporting things like gallium, germanium, and antimony to the U.S.
Right, those specialized metals vital for semiconductors and stuff.
Vital. And then in April, they added rare earth elements to that export control list.
Ah, rare earths. Everyone hears about them. Crucial for electronics, EVs, defense systems.
Absolutely crucial. And China dominates the processing. Some analysts were calling it China's ultimate metallic weapon. A pretty stark description.
It really paints a picture of an economic conflict fought on multiple fronts, doesn't it?
It does. Now, the U.S. tariff policy itself seemed to be, evolving in real time, adapting.
How so?
Well, initially, they seemed to exempt consumer electronics, smartphones, laptops.
To avoid sudden price hikes for consumers, presumably?
That seems to have been the thinking, yeah. Avoid that immediate sticker shock.
But other sectors weren't so lucky.
Not at all. Textiles, apparel, toys, bam. Hit with punitive duties, up to 125% in some cases.
Ouch. I remember seeing a logistics expert call it organized affefonomics.
Right, a colorful way to say mess around and find out. Highlighting those really harsh, maybe unexpected consequences for certain industries.
Definitely a shock for those businesses. And the tech exemption, that wasn't meant to last forever, was it?
No, the reporting suggested it was temporary. Tariffs on semiconductors, other electronics, they were expected within about a month.
So a phased approach, maybe, but aiming for pretty broad coverage eventually.
Seems like it. And the numbers really underscore the scale of this shift. U.S. customs duties as a percentage of imports.
Yeah.
They hit levels not seen since the Smoot-Hawley era, back in the 1930s.
Wow. The era often blamed for worsening the Great Depression. So overall, U.S. tariff rates hit a 100-year high by April 2025.
Exactly. It just hammers home how big a policy change this was. And it wasn't just China feeling the heat.
Right. Allies like Canada and Mexico got hit too.
Yeah, new 25% duties on many of their goods.
Right.
And understandably, they were not happy. Lots of complaints.
I bet. And China, meanwhile, obviously condemned the U.S. actions strongly.
And hinted at more retaliation, beyond just tariffs, maybe targeting U.S. companies in China.
There was talk about Tesla's Shanghai factory, wasn't there? Speculation, at least.
There was, which would be a huge escalation, obviously, shows how tangled everything is.
It really does. And it's interesting to bring in Ray Dalio's perspective here.
Yeah, the veteran investor. He warned against seeing this just as a tariff thing.
Right. He argued it's more a symptom of these, 5 deeper forces reshaping the world order.
And that this trade fight might just be a precursor to, potentially more dangerous confrontations down the line. James Lai echoed that worry, too.
So it's not just about trade deficits. It's deeply tied into national security, great power competition, a much bigger picture.
A much bigger picture. Okay, so that's the context of the recent escalation. But to really get why this is causing such upheaval, we need to rewind a bit. Why did so much manufacturing end up in China anyway?
That's crucial, yeah. For 30-plus years, China offered this really compelling package for manufacturers.
The starting point, as Jelani noted, was definitely the super cheap labor rate, especially back in the 90s, early 2000s.
Absolutely. Wages were just a tiny fraction of Western levels then. But it wasn't only cheap labor, was it?
No, far from it. China built this incredibly powerful industrial ecosystem. Think dense networks of suppliers, skilled workers, logistics infrastructure, all packed together, the cluster effect.
Like Shenzhen for electronics, you could find literally any component, any service right there, super efficient.
Totally. And big players like Apple's partner Foxconn, they thrived on that efficiency,
No.
sourcing parts practically next door to assembly lines.
And then there was the regulatory side. Historically, maybe more lenient environmental rules, labor rules.
And definitely business-friendly policies from local governments trying to attract factories. Plus, tax incentives.
Those tax-free export zones were a big draw. And, we shouldn't forget, the currency was kept intentionally undervalued for a long time, making exports cheaper.
All right, so you bundle it all together. Low wages, huge labor pool, government support, dense supplier networks, efficient logistics. It was a winning formula.
For decades, yeah. But importantly, China also invested heavily in skills, right? Building up workforce know-how.
Critically important.
Yeah.
That led to high productivity, high quality in many areas. It wasn't just about cost anymore.
I remember that quote from the toy executive, Molson Hart. He said, Chinese manufacturing labor isn't just cheaper, it's better.
That really cuts through, doesn't it? And he gave that great example from his own business.
Yeah.
Educational toys needing precise plastic molds.
Yeah, he said he could buy the machines in the U.S., no problem.
But finding people with the deep expertise to make and fix those complex molds, that knowledge is largely gone here.
It really points to this erosion of industrial capability in some Western countries. The skills, the knowledge base, the whole ecosystem just faded away in certain sectors. Hart's point was that tariffs alone won't fix that. You can't just magically bring back production if the fundamental know-how isn't there anymore. He felt many Americans kind of trivialize manufacturing's complexity.
He even mentioned cultural aspects, didn't he? Observing Chinese workers working longer hours, maybe more happily, being physically faster, attributing it to a manufacturing culture and better technical education.
It's a challenging perspective, for sure. Now, things have been shifting at the margins recently, even before these big tariffs.
Right, rising wages in China, the earlier trade tensions, COVID disruptions that all push companies towards the China plus one strategy.
Keeping a foot in China, but also setting up shop somewhere else as a backup.
Exactly, but fully disentangling.
Yeah.
That's proving incredibly hard. Global supply chains are just so deeply woven into China. It's not just final assembly.
It's the inputs, right? The components, the materials.
So many upstream inputs still come from China. Think Taiwan or South Korea making advanced chips.
That end up on boards assembled in China.
Or Vietnam sewing clothes using Chinese fabrics and zippers. This deep integration means trying to rip it all out quickly is hugely disruptive and costly.
So when these massive new tariffs landed in April 25, it must have just sent companies scrambling, rip it out and reroute, basically.
Total scramble mode. The very first reaction was that rush to front-load shipments, right? Get as much stuff into the U.S. before the tariffs hit.
Which led to that record trade deficit we mentioned. Companies front-running the tariffs.
But then, boom, Liberation Day, as some wryly called it, the day the tariffs took effect. Ocean freight bookings just tanked, orders canceled, rerouted.
And think about the small businesses caught in the middle, getting hit with huge, unexpected customs bills on stuff already on the water.
Yeah, sometimes wiping out their entire profit margin on that shipment. Desperate situations for some.
You could just feel the crisis mode setting in, especially in those heavily reliant industries, toys, apparel, electronics.
We heard that story about the toy company. Costs per unit soaring, making existing orders totally unprofitable overnight. A nightmare scenario.
Many companies just felt blindsided by the speed and the sheer scale of it all.
And it wasn't just finished goods, importers feeling the pain. Remember Ryan Peterson's point?
From Flexport, yeah.
Yeah.
About U.S. manufacturers being collateral damage.
Exactly. Because tariffs were also hitting the components and machinery they import to make things domestically. So even U.S. factories faced rising costs if they relied on global inputs.
It really complicates that simple bring manufacturing home narrative, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. It's way more complex than just putting up walls. So facing these huge cost hikes, the immediate reaction was this frantic search for alternative production locations, countries not yet hit by the tariffs.
But that became tricky too, didn't it? Peterson also mentioned the tariffs hitting places like Vietnam and Cambodia.
Right, that was described as an absolute bomb. 46% on Vietnam, 49% on Cambodia. These were key destinations for companies pursuing that China plus one strategy.
So it really felt like whack-a-mole. You shift production to avoid one tariff, then that place gets hit too.
It's exactly that dynamic. So where were companies actually managing to shift production? Which regions started seeing an uptick?
Mexico seemed like a big one.
Definitely a prime beneficiary. Proximity to the U.S., the USMCA trade deal. That helps a lot.
And we even saw reports of Chinese manufacturers setting up shop in Mexico to serve the U.S. market tariff-free.
Yeah, estimates were suggesting maybe 20% of new factories in Mexico could be Chinese-owned within a couple of years, using it as a backdoor, especially for things like auto parts.
Interesting. And Vietnam, despite the new tariffs hitting them too.
Still attracting business, yeah. It was already benefiting from China plus one, especially in electronics and apparel. Electronics became a huge chunk of their exports, like 32%.
Yeah.
It's definitely a key conduit for China in some ways.
Meaning importing Chinese components for assembly.
Right. But those new U.S. tariffs certainly tempered Vietnam's advantage somewhat.
What about India? They seemed keen to grab a bigger slice.
They are, especially in electronics and textiles. Apple starting manufacturing there was a big signal. India's got the scale potential, democratic alignment, though they face their own hurdles with infrastructure and bureaucracy, and they weren't fully exempt from U.S. tariffs either.
And then other Southeast Asian nations, Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand.
All picking up some business. Indonesia's making a really aggressive play in the EV battery supply chain, using its nickel resources, attracting big investments.
And it wasn't just Asia and the Americas, right? Eastern Europe, North Africa.
Seen movement, too. Poland is emerging as a key hub in Europe, especially for the auto industry and EV batteries, though often using Chinese materials still.
And Morocco.
Leveraging its phosphate reserves, attracting Chinese battery factories, too, becoming one of these important connector economies.
So it really feels like the global supply chain map is being actively redrawn. More regional, maybe more complex.
Definitely more complex. And in the short term, definitely seeing inefficiencies.
Yeah.
Logistics bottlenecks, overwhelmed ports in some places, maybe service cuts to smaller U.S. ports.
We heard reports of port managers just dealing with constant confusion, unpredictability, these supply chain tourniquets causing major blockages.
And the bottom line is companies are paying more, carrying more risk. That eventually feeds into inflation potentially.
Yeah.
And ironically, some manufacturing is just taking a detour through other countries, but still ultimately reliant on China.
Okay, so with all this shaking out, who looks like the winners and who looks like the losers in this big manufacturing shift?
Well, on the potential winners list, Mexico really jumps out. Proximity, USMCA, they're soaking up investment in auto, appliances, electronics, though maybe straining their infrastructure.
Vietnam and Southeast Asia generally.
Yeah.
Still benefiting in apparel electronics.
Yeah, benefiting, but maybe hitting limits with labor pools and still very dependent on Chinese inputs.
Yeah.
Indonesia, as we said, looks key for the EV supply chain connector role.
South Asia, India, Bangladesh.
India for electronics, chemicals, pharma. Bangladesh keeps going in apparel. But then you have Cambodia getting hit with that big 49% tariff, so it's not universal.
Eastern Europe, Poland, North Africa.
Poland's looking good, especially for European companies needing alternatives. Battery manufacturing is a prime example. North Africa, Morocco, Egypt, Tunisia could grab more textile and light manufacturing for Europe.
And what about the U.S. itself? Is it actually winning?
Potentially some upticks. Steel, aluminum, maybe. Some factory expansions, appliances, electronics, chips eventually. But Molson Hart's argument looms large. Are the workforce skills and supplier base really ready? Gains might be limited without that.
Okay, on to the potential losers then. China's export sector seems obvious.
Yeah, likely volume loss, especially at the lower end of manufacturing. They'll try to offset it, move up the value chain, deepen trade elsewhere, but still a hit.
U.S. consumers and importers.
Almost certainly facing higher prices. Tariffs act like a tax, right? Kyla Scanlon called it regressive tax, hitting lower-income folks harder.
And those emerging markets caught in the crossfire, like Vietnam, Cambodia.
Collateral damage, yeah. And just global efficiency overall. Fractured supply chains could be a drag on growth.
And those connector countries trying to play both sides.
That's a tough balancing act. They might increasingly feel forced to choose sides between the U.S. and China.
No, these impacts aren't uniform, are they? It really depends on the specific industry.
Absolutely crucial point. Take tech and electronics. Big hardware smartphones, laptops got that temporary relief initially.
But that's changing. Tariffs expected on chips, phones, PCs.
Right, which is just accelerating diversification.
Yeah.
Apple to Vietnam, India, Dell HP looking at Mexico, Thailand. The trend is definitely towards regional tech supply chains.
Automotive, complex global chains there too.
Big pressure to source more parts within North America. Benefits Mexico, Canada under USMCA, despite those new general tariffs. You might see more European, Asian car companies building plants in the U.S., and that big push to onshore the EV battery supply chain. Huge focus there.
And retail.
Yeah.
Consumer goods like clothes, shoes, toys, furniture.
Among the hardest hit, really forcing rapid shifts to Bangladesh, Vietnam, Latin America. It's tough for small retailers especially.
Big box stores have more leverage, I guess.
More leverage, yeah. Renegotiating, diversifying sources, maybe just accepting lower margins for a while.
What about U.S. manufacturers who need imported machinery or components?
They're feeling the cost pinch. They'll likely petition for specific exclusions. Maybe we'll see more cooperation among allied countries on supplying industrial inputs.
And agriculture always seems to get caught in these trade wars.
Big risk for U.S. farmers. Lost markets, lower prices due to Chinese retaliation. And that background worry about food supplies being weaponized if things get worse.
Finally, the logistics folks, the shippers, the ports.
Lots of uncertainty for them, shifting volumes, maybe less traffic on the main China-U.S. routes, a real risk of a downturn if global trade slows significantly. It's a tangled web.
So given this chaos, what can companies actually do? How do you build resilience now? It feels like the million-dollar question.
It really is. Resilience is the name of the game now.
Yeah.
Top strategy. Diversify your sourcing. Don't rely on one country.
Have multiple suppliers in different places.
Exactly. It costs more, sure, but think of it as an insurance policy. Panasonic is a good example people cite.
And nearshoring or friendshoring, moving production closer or to allied nations.
Big trend. Reduces geopolitical risk, leverages trade deals. You see European firms moving closer to Europe, U.S. firms closer to the U.S. or Mexico. Nimble supply chain routing is key.
What about inventory? Are companies holding more stock?
Definitely seeing a shift from just-in-time to just-in-case. Carrying higher inventories of critical stuff, building in buffer time. Big retailers are stocking up warehouses more.
And are there clever ways around the tariffs? Legal tactic?
Oh yeah, tariff engineering is a whole field. Trying to change product classification codes, HS codes, shifting where the final transformation happens.
Using bonded warehouses or foreign trade zones.
Exactly. Filing for exemptions, lobbying. It's all part of the playbook for larger companies.
And relationships with suppliers must be more crucial than ever.
Absolutely. Closer collaboration, longer contracts, maybe even financial support for key partners. And mapping your supply chain deeply, knowing who your suppliers are to spot hidden risks.
Plus, just being ready for anything, right?
Yeah.
Scenario planning.
Essential.
Yeah.
Running simulations. What if this happens? Having contingency plans, alternate materials, maybe redesigning products to be more modular. Agility is the competitive advantage now, and constant geopolitical risk monitoring.
It's clear technology is a huge part of this response, maybe even driving some of it.
Totally critical.
Mhm.
AI, data analytics, automation, they're enabling this shift. It's less about chasing cheap labor now, maybe more about chasing efficiency through tech.
How does automation make local production viable again?
Well, it can neutralize that low-wage advantage China had. Robots, advanced machinery in the U.S. or Europe, they don't care about wages.
Those automated lights-out factories we hear about?
That trend's accelerating. High tariffs give you more incentive to automate at home rather than import. And things like 3D printing allow for localized production of certain parts.
And AI's role in optimizing these complex, shifting chains.
Huge potential. Analyzing masses of data to suggest the best sourcing strategies, reallocating orders automatically, forecasting demand better.
Even flagging geopolitical risks before they blow up.
Exactly. AI can run those simulations, the digital twins, to test resilience. It's really augmenting human decision-making in complex ways.
What about just managing the paperwork? Trade compliance?
AI is helping there too. Automating product classification, spotting chances to use trade treaties, filling out forms, digitizing the whole process gives much better visibility.
And automation enables bringing back some advanced manufacturing. Chips, pharma.
Yeah, precision automation makes onshoring those industries more feasible. You see with the new U.S. chip fabs being built.
Technology is also streamlining the actual movement of goods, the logistics.
For sure. Platforms matching freight loads, intelligent rerouting, blockchain for tracking provenance transparently,
Yeah.
IoT sensors tracking shipments in real time.
And even using AI as an early warning system, looking at satellite images.
Yeah, tracking factory activity, port throughput via satellite and AI to get a real-time pulse on economic shifts. Pretty amazing stuff.
So it really feels like we're entering a new phase. Economic nationalism is up, tariffs are high.
Right, a definite trend towards that, maybe a bifurcated global economy. Tariffs are a key tool, hitting those 100-year highs.
And supply chains are reorganizing, not just for cost, but for resilience, for geopolitics.
Leading to maybe shorter chains, but probably more expensive ones, which could mean higher prices for consumers ultimately.
But innovation could offset some of that, right? New production methods, smarter operations.
Absolutely. There's huge potential for innovation to blunt the tariff impacts. But it needs, as we discussed, real expertise and nuance, not just slapping on duties.
And we still see those contrasting views. Skeptics like Molson Hart saying tariffs fail without deeper fixes.
Versus others hoping this jolts companies into finally reducing that over-reliance on China.
And China's perspective. Losing low-end manufacturing isn't new, but this trade war hits their high-tech goals.
Creates more urgency for them to internationalize the yuan, build alternative trade networks, and they're pouring money into AI and robotics, too.
So the global supply map is definitely being redrawn. Regional hubs, those connector economies, Vietnam, Mexico, Indonesia, Poland, Morocco becoming more important.
But it seems unlikely one country just steps in to replace China wholesale anytime soon. It's more fragmented now.
And the message for companies seems crystal clear. Adapt or get left behind.
Supply chain management is now absolutely core strategy. Resilience, agility, intelligence, and understanding that bigger geopolitical picture.
Like Dalio said, it's not mostly about tariffs.
Exactly. That's what success looks like in this new era.
But, despite the stress and uncertainty, global trade is fluid. Companies are resourceful.
They are. It's a tough time, no doubt, but it's also a chance to build genuinely better, more robust supply chains using adaptation and technology.
So as we've dug into here, tariffs are forcing this real-time reshaping. And the companies that are smart, agile, proactive, they can navigate the storm and maybe even come out stronger. So just to wrap up the key takeaways for you listening, we saw the sheer speed and scale of these tariff changes. We looked at the complex reasons China became so dominant in manufacturing in the first place.
Right, and those ripple effects spreading out across different countries, different industries, and critically, the role of resilience and technology in how companies are trying to cope and adapt.
And it really feels like this is just the start of a pretty profound shift in the global economy.
Yeah, we're thinking about the long-term implications for businesses, consumers, international relations. It's all interconnected.
So maybe a final thought to leave you with. Given how intertwined economics and geopolitics are now, what might be some of the unexpected consequences of this new tariff world order that could emerge down the road?
That's a great question. Definitely something to keep watching and thinking about.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for taking this deep dive with us today into such a complex and fast-moving topic.